Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to stretch and you are ready for what we have planned. So, this morning we have talked about the power of love, the importance of community, and the role parents play as advocates for our children. We've also added another important tool to our backpacks by learning how to build those strong partnerships with our schools. Our next tool is understanding the rights, protections, and resources available to LGBTQ plus youth and their families. As parents, we don't have to become attorneys or policy experts, but rather have a basic understanding of how to make informed decisions and to advocate more effectively for our kids. And that is exactly what today's panel is designed to do. Our panel is titled The Right to Belong, Understanding Protections for LGBTQ plus youth and families. And we are joined today by an incredible group of leaders whose perspectives span education, school leadership, public policy, and lived experience. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Jamie Joseph Ruiz is our program director for Equality Florida's Safe and Healthy Schools program, where she is working with school districts, educators, students, and families across Florida to create safer and more inclusive learning environments for all our students. Matthew Johnson is the president of PFLAG Wesley Chapel, Pasco. He's also our newest parent ambassador with Equality Florida and a dedicated volunteer and advocate. His advocacy journey began when his youngest child came out as transgender, inspiring him to support not only his own family, but other families navigating similar experiences. Dr. Sarah Rockwell is a lifelong educator and Alachua County School Board member and the proud mother of two LGBTQ plus children with disabilities. With more than 20 years of experience in education, research, and community advocacy, she brings both professional expertise and personal perspective to today's conversation. And once again, we have Patrick Cochran who is the senior manager of state and federal advocacy at PFLAG National, where he works with chapters across the country to strengthen advocacy efforts and create safer and more inclusive communities for LGBTQ plus people and those who love them. He brings his expertise in public policy and a passion for empowering families to become effective advocates. And he joined us last year as well. So before we begin, I'd also encourage everyone joining us today to think about the question you have had as a parent or caregiver. While we may not answer every individual situation, my hope is that you're going to leave with a clearer understanding of resources available to you and get the confidence to know that you're not alone in navigating this journey. So with that, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. So our panel is called The Right to Belong, and I'm going to ask each of you these questions. When you hear the words, the right to belong, what do they mean to you? And I'm going to start with Janie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here with you, Jen. Program has been going really great so far. And so for me, when I hear the right to belong, as it relates to students in school, I hear that and I think that it means that your rights are respected. It means that you are included, that when policy or guidance and laws are being written, they're being written with you specifically in mind, and you are not being treated in a way that is separate from others, but people are also not blind to the fact that you are not just like, because no two people are exactly the same. So honoring and respecting your individuality, your differences, but also making it clear and apparent that your individuality doesn't make you less than anybody else. So ensuring that you feel like you have a place and a home within the space that you're in.
I love that. Yes, a home. I love that. That makes me feel so safe sending my child to school, knowing that's his home away from home. Matthew, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, so the right to belong means that, everyone should be accepted as they are and really only judged by their character and what they contribute in that space, right? We should all only have to worry about being judged for the weird things that we say and do, not because of our gender, where we're from, or what we look like. But for my family, this kind of belonging isn't something that we can always take for granted. My son happens to be trans, so there are some spaces where this part of his existence is not accepted. and how he is treated has been politicized. So in school, my wife Megan and I, hi Meg, she's watching. We have to work with the other parents and the school staff and kind of figure out how we can ensure that my son's going to feel respected while still living, within some of these laws that have really been designed to make my family feel like we don't belong. Where is he going to use the restroom? What pronouns will his teachers use? Will the other kids and sadly even their parents, use his identity against him? So, as his dad, I feel like it's kind of my job to try to solve as many of these problems as I can before he even walks in the door. And the ones that I can't solve, maybe be able to prepare him so that he knows what he's going to be able to experience. Um, but when I hear the words, the right to belong, I also know that for families like mine, this isn't always given. So as a personal example, today my son was supposed to have his first day at a sleepaway summer camp. Um, but last week we were surprised to learn that the camp has recently changed their policy on trans kids. Had we dropped him off this morning, he would have been placed in a girls' cabin where his transness would have been just, put on a public display. So, obviously he's crushed. And this is really the first time he's seeing, at least in real time, this type of discrimination. And we're trying to work, together to show him how we address this. But, we're also using this as a chance to show him, why and how we can advocate against, some of these policies and the laws that have been kind of put in place to scare schools and different organizations into adopting them. And then, of course, to move on and find as a community or create some spaces, where we do feel like we belong.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. I've, as a parent, actually kind of experienced something similar and had to tell my child as well that unfortunately they don't have the right to belong in a space that they should. So my heart goes out to you. It is, I love that you're using it as a teaching moment, but it doesn't make it any easier. And our kids do have the right to belong everywhere and be celebrated. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Rockwell.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. To me, the right to belong means that everyone is able to be their true selves completely and openly without feeling unsafe in any way, whether that's from legislation or structures or just pure bullying. My daughter has experienced a lot of bullying for who she is, and that's been hard to see. And so that's happening outside of any legislation or restrictions. That's peers. So right to belong is about that, but it's more than that. It's also being in an environment where you are accommodated, whether that's for disability or gender identity or any other need that you might have, English language learners, as my children also have disabilities. So having adequate accommodations is part of the right to belong. It's also about seeing yourself represented. So our materials that we use in schools, who is represented in those materials matters, because kids need the opportunity to see their own identities reflected and to have windows into the identities of other people so that they learn to have empathy and respect. And when we think about the right to belong in our schools, there has been a lot of legislation that is restricting our ability to make sure that every child has the right to belong. And I know for me as a parent and as a school board member, it's scary and it's frustrating and it's quite frankly infuriating. But I want us to try to remember that this amount of legislative pushback is based on fear, because the people in power know that when we are united, they lose some of their power. We are strong when we are united. And so they're doing everything in their power to make sure that we're not united. And we really do have strength and power to push back against this. And I know change is coming.
Yeah, thank you for that. I agree. I think the visibility piece is huge when we talk about belonging, because we know that our kids, when they open a book and they see their family represented or they see themselves. So thank you for bringing that point up. And I do agree that We are stronger when we tether our boats together, whether we are looking at the disability space, immigration, race, sexual orientation. When we work together to make sure everybody feels safe, we are definitely stronger. So thank you for that. Patrick, same question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to be touching on a lot of the points that our other awesome panelists said, but basically, to me, if you have a right to belong, that means you have the right to show up as your whole self. I think that this is especially important at school. Kids, when they're in school, they're learning about who they really are. They're learning about who their friends are. They're learning about what subjects they like, and different ways of expressing themselves, whether that's going to be through music or art or writing or through sports or whatever. These are all really important things the kids are learning about themselves when they're in school. So it's really important that schools make that space for kids to be themselves and to find, their niche, so to speak. But when you have policies like forced outing policies, like don't say gay and trans policies, that really makes that impossible. You can't say that a school is there for every child and for every family while you're simultaneously erasing the queer community from curriculums and library shelves. How can you say that everyone actually belongs? And how can a queer child, a trans child, think that they belong if you can't even acknowledge their existence in the classroom? And how can trans kids feel that they belong and that they have this kind of safe space if they can't turn to a trusted adult at school, if they don't have that kind of safety at home? And let alone the message that this sends to other kids about how they should be treating queer kids at school. So these are all things that really don't send the right message for kids at school. But this is kind of the way to start to actually try to put these things back into congruence is by being together with other parents and to talk about this and to talk about what can we do, what sort of advocacy has been effective so far, and what lessons can we learn from each other. I think this is kind of where you start to actually get to a point where you can actually build that right to belong, that safe space at school.
Yeah, thank you all. I love that each of you really approach that question from a different perspective. Although I think the theme is the same, you all kind of touched on different things. And I think that's exactly what makes today's conversation so valuable. Let's dive a little deeper. So Patrick, I'm going to go back to you. Your work is, you give a very different perspective because you're hearing not only from families in Florida, but families across the country. And you work with so many PFLAG chapters from all over, small towns, big cities. So my question to you is, what concerns seem to be universal, and what questions are parents asking regardless of what state they live in?
Yeah, so I could tell you that issues with school policies and those concerns really cut across the red state, blue state divide. School districts in California and New York, and so the PFLAG chapters that are there are having a lot of the same debates and the same issues as school districts in Florida and Texas. And that's especially true now that you have federally, you have the Justice Department, you have the Education Department that are pressuring schools that have trans inclusive policies to abandon those policies by launching these investigations, forcing these schools to spend millions of dollars defending themselves and defending their right to have trans inclusive policies. So for me, regardless of where people live and regardless of who I'm talking to, what chapter I'm talking to, I really get the same basic question, which is just, how can I make sure that my school is going to stay safe or be safe for my trans kid? And my answer is basically the same everywhere. And that is, I really encourage people to get involved with school board advocacy. Because when you have these issues that are cutting across state lines and cutting across kind of the partisan divide, it really is the best answer that I can give regardless of where you are. If you show up to your school board meeting and you demand that your school works for your kid and you can get other people to join you, and build as big an advocacy group as possible, that's the best way to kind of address that really universal concern that I'm seeing.
Yeah, thank you for that. And actually, one of the workshops in the summit later today is on the importance of school board, because I think folks don't realize how powerful that is. And so absolutely, that's something that is universal everywhere. Janie, I'm going to turn to you. So over the past few years, Florida families have experienced a rapidly changing education landscape. With our new laws, our evolving policies, and updated school procedures, so many parents are telling us that they're unsure of their rights and they're not sure what the best way is to advocate for their child. So can you help us unpack some of the most common questions that you are hearing, and maybe touch on what are 2 or 3 key things that every parent should know about their rights here in Florida?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. So, over the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen a gamut of laws pertaining to LGBT students, LGBT teachers come down from the state. And you would think that with time, things would become a bit more calm and we would have a better handle of understanding these laws. Unfortunately, they were written so ambiguously and vaguely that they continue to just cause confusion and uncertainty year after year after year. It's been several years since we've seen laws around around pronouns and use of affirming pronouns, and still we are continue to get crisis calls related to pronoun use. And when we receive these calls, usually, it's a parent reaching out or a teacher, someone who is feeling like they're getting treated unfairly by their school. And oftentimes, when we investigate a little further, typically on the school end, there is a discrepancy either between the district's guidance around pronouns or whatever the issue is and what is happening at the school. And that's another issue that continues to take place. So we see pronouns frequently. People are asking questions about that because there's just so much nuance around that. Who can use pronouns? Are we allowed to solicit pronouns from students? Which, if you're a teacher, the answer is no. And so many questions related to that we get year after year. And even when a school district has guidance, we see that each school operates as a little ecosystem in and of itself, where if there is no clear guidance that is being communicated down from the school district to the region and then from the region to the school in a very consistent, streamlined, efficient, clear way, there's there is going to be inconsistency. So outside of pronouns, we are always seeing questions related to restroom access and use, who can use restrooms, separation of restrooms. When field trips come into play, we also see an overlapping of questions related to field trips, privacy and confidentiality, which shouldn't even be a question, but do I have to questions around, outing a student simply just because someone is aware that a student might be LGBT, questions related to GSAs, and if GSAs can even exist, or if a teacher can champion a GSA, even though we know that the Equal Access Act makes it very clear that GSAs can exist if other non-curricular clubs exist at a school. And so, in retaliation, and there's several other questions that continue around dress code and other things. And so in retaliation to these things, the best thing that you can do is do your best to have a clear understanding, but we don't expect, unless you are doing this work day in and day out, we don't expect um, uh, folks in the community or parents who have a million things going on to understand the nuance of whether who can use pronouns and whether their school is having a correct interpretation, right? And so the best thing that you can do is to tap into resources like Equality Florida, Safe and Healthy Schools, and the resources in your community, because we are doing this work and we want to be able to support you and making sure that your student is being treated correctly and that their rights are being respected. And so ensuring that you are asking questions, that you are not just taking no for an answer, or that you're not just taking the response that is being given to you lying down. Because again, you need to, oh, I just want to make it very clear. So many times when we go in and we aim to support, we find that there is a miscommunication or that someone at the school is either interpreting it incorrectly or just afraid to even address the issue. And so we're getting this negative outcome where the parent is feeling like their student is being treated poorly, or there's this disparity happening. And most of the time, you know, our educators, they want to do the right thing. We are in this business to support kids, but these laws make it very scary when they are punishing our educators for essentially doing right by kids and affirming kids in certain situations. And so making sure that you're asking questions and that whatever, if you're getting a response and you're advocating for your student, you're getting a response that you feel is not right, then keep going further. Take it all the way up to the school district. Tap in your resources. You, as a parent, you have the right to guide the upbringing of your child. And it doesn't matter what state you are in, you have a right to ensure that your child is being taken care of and being treated correctly and being supported. And the best thing you can do is continue to advocate for them.
Thank you, Janie. Yeah, absolutely. Matthew, as a parent, I'm going to turn to you because your journey into advocacy really began as a dad, as you mentioned. And as president of PFLAG Wesley Chapel and a parent ambassador with Equality Florida, I know you have spoken to countless families. In fact, you've welcomed many families to their very first PFLAG meeting. So what do you notice happens when a parent realizes they're no longer alone?
Yeah, so my favorite thing that happens when a parent realizes they're not alone is they can finally move beyond some of these like surface level questions. You know, everyone comes in asking, what does this mean? Or, you know, how do we know we're doing the right thing? But when a new parent meets a group of parents that are in similar circumstances, they can see that, you know, none of us fully understand what's going on, and that's okay. You know, they see that you don't have to understand everything about your kid to love and accept them, and they also get to see that, you know, some of the assurances that we're seeking that we really want for ourselves, you know, that it's not going to come from having all the answers. You know, it's going to come from being able to give your kids the freedom and the tools that they need to create the life that they want for themselves, and then, you know, being able to watch them thrive in it. You know, that's when you're going to know that you're really doing the right thing. And then, you know, once some of those doubts start to fade away, you know, they also get to see, you know, what being affirmed is going to mean to their kids, you know, looking through other families' lived experiences. And they'll also sometimes see, you know, what that lack of acceptance could do, and how that could change the kids' lives. And, you know, I think that's like really impactful and can help make parents be more active, you know, in the ways that they support their kids.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I think, you know, realizing you're not alone can be incredibly empowering. And, you know, it gives parents, like you said, the confidence to ask the questions, build the relationships, and become active partners in their child's education. So, like Janie had mentioned before, you know, things are so vague and there's that fear, but I do think that finding the support really gives you the edge to be able to confidently be that advocate. Sarah, so you are both a school board member and a parent, and you've experienced this from multiple perspectives. So my question for you is, how has your lived experience shaped the way you approach your role? And what advice would you give to parents who are just beginning to engage with their child's school?
Yeah, so navigating a school district is challenging. There's tons of education jargon. Everything in your school district is divided up into different siloed departments. It's not just each school that acts like its own little ecosystem. It's every department at the district level. And the larger your district is, the more that's the case. I can say I have a PhD in special education. I've been a teacher. I'm now on the school board, and I still have difficulties sometimes. I've sat in 504 plan meetings, IEP meetings, where I have had to battle to get my kids the accommodations they needed. Just last month, we had an issue because the database administrator at the middle school my daughter's going to retired, and her enrollment didn't get processed correctly. And, luckily, I knew immediately, I knew who the principal was. I didn't have to Google that. I was able to email him, and he was out of town, but because of who I am, he immediately emailed me back, told me what he thought happened. And I know who the district database person is and was able to call her. Most parents don't know that. So one of my jobs as a school board member is to be that liaison between the community and this monolithic organization. As a school board member, I can't directly solve problems at the school level, but I can direct parents to who the right person is for them to talk to. And I try very hard to do that. If you have not had that experience with your school board member, support somebody new, because that is our job as school board members, is to be that liaison. And when a parent's having a problem and isn't finding the right person to solve that problem, that's part of our job. But that's also part of your school administration and school counselor's job. So I would tell parents, have a good relationship with these people. Know by name the person who greets you at the front desk of your school. Know their email address. Know your school counselor and guidance clerical person. Know your principal and assistant principal, even if it's just knowing their names so you can easily find their email address, saying good morning to them from the car line, making sure that you know who those faces are so that when you have an issue, you can go to them and they can help you find the right person, even if it's not somebody at the school level. That's going to be your best tool, is knowing those people who can help you navigate this very challenging system.
That's so powerful. Yeah. And that is practical advice that, at the beginning of the school year that I think every parent can do. And, one thing I keep hearing today is that, parents don't need to know everything. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. But what we're hearing, and I think what I hope people take away from this, is that we just need trusted people and trusted resources. And so let's build on that. Janie, I'm going to bring it back to you, because we'll bring it back to in the school. So what are some practical ways, and I think Dr. Rockwell touched on this, that parents can build those positive relationships with the teachers and the counselors, administrators, while advocating for their child? And what should they do if they encounter resistance? Because I think many parents don't want to make waves, right? They don't want to be that problem parent, but there's a way of doing it where you are an advocate. And so what is some advice for parents in that situation?
Yeah, I really appreciate a lot of what you said, Dr. Rockwell, because it's true. Sometimes these in a school, in a district, a lot of different departments are operating in silos. And so when there is a hiccup or some type of issue, it becomes a learning process for everyone, right? And so it's important for parents to bear in mind that a lot of times there isn't necessarily malicious intent when a teacher or an educator is saying that they can't do something or they're shying away from something, especially with the way that the landscape has changed here in Florida. A lot of times, what we're seeing is just this fear or uncertainty. So let it be a learning process, right? We understand that it's important to make sure that it's also important to make sure that you are advocating for your child in a way that is very clear and very concise, and leaving it so that the teacher and the school knows that this is your voice as a parent advocating for the need of your child, because your voice matters within a school system. I worked in higher education for a long time, and it's the same thing. Students and parents, your voice matters a lot. And so making it very clear what you want and what your needs are, but also allowing that learning process to play out ensure that, you know, your child is being treated correctly, but not letting up and continuing to follow up. And also teaching your child, your student to advocate for themselves, making sure that they're asking questions, that they're clear in their advocacy. A lot of these laws are much more, allow more autonomy for students, right? And what students can write about and what students can do and say in regard to certain things. And so making sure that your students are aware that they have rights and that they are asking the right questions as well. And so also when you're being met with resistance, tapping into those resources, making sure that you are aware of your rights, staying up to date on your guidance and the policy in your specific school. Sometimes it can be easy to get swept up in what we hear about what's happening in Florida. And an issue that we encounter a lot is, you know, there's headline after headline, and one headline may have nothing to do with what's happening at your school, but you might feel like it does. And so you hear one thing from a teacher that combined with a headline, and you think, okay, well, my hands are tied. I guess I can't do anything. This is what I heard on the news, and then this teacher said this. And then when we do just a little bit digging, we realize neither of those things have any bearing on the academic success of your student. And if you just dug a little deeper, stayed the course, you would have found that you could have gotten what you wanted and what you were asking for all along. You just had to investigate a little more. And so the learning process is key here. That is what I want to just continue to stress. That is sometimes it's not going to be solved overnight. It's not something to where maybe you call an advocacy organization. Our goal is to get you your resolution in 24 hours if we can, but sometimes it's a process for everyone because of the way that some of these laws were written. There is a little bit of legwork that needs to be done, but you'll get there.
Thank you, Janie. And I'm actually we have one question in the Q&A that I think fits right into exactly what you're talking about. So a parent is asking, how do you balance advocating for your child and protecting your child's privacy? Because that is a very, right, Dr. Rockwell, that's, you don't want to out your child. So real quick, what would be your number one advice on how to do that?
Well, did you say Dr. Rockwell or did you?
Well, either Janie or Dr. Rockwell, either one of you.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I think I heard you say Dr. Rockwell, so I'll shut up.
So, this is very, very challenging because, we're in a situation in Florida where parents are scared. And we're scared for our children's safety and our own safety. I've heard parents that they're worried that if they advocate for their child, CPS might be called on them. And a lot of this fear, like Janie said, is based on headlines. It's not based on reality. It's based on this kind of clickbait culture that we're in. And so, we all want to protect our children's privacy, but I think we also need to have frank conversations about meeting their needs. So, obviously my daughter has medical disabilities, and obviously I don't want to share her medical records with the world. But when it comes to getting her accommodations at school, I'm going to share what I need to in order for her to get the accommodations that she needs. And so, it's this fine balance. And I think a lot of it is about us as parents having a conversation with our kids. So, we can say to our kids, do you want me to sign permission for you to use your preferred name at school and your preferred pronouns at school if your teachers are willing? Or do you not want me to disclose that information? And, giving children some of the control over those decisions is important. I personally have a child who says, I don't really care about pronouns. And so, I'd rather not even disclose that because this is Florida and it could come back and be a problem for me later. So no, I'm not going to worry about that. But that might not be your child's situation. That might be something that for them to feel okay, they really want that disclosed so that teachers who are willing to use their pronouns can. That's another, quickly So there's no misunderstanding. With parent permission, teachers are allowed to use a child's preferred pronouns. Just as a school board, we can't force that. So that's what the law actually says. You know, and again, I would say put some of that autonomy on our kids, because it's their privacy we're talking about. And so unless it's like a health and safety issue, let them lead the discussion on what they're willing to disclose to get the accommodations and support that they need.
Yeah, that is great advice. And I think whenever I talk to parents also about advocating for their children in general, it is their lived experience, it is their journey. And I do think having them a part of that process is so powerful. So thank you for that. Patrick, I'm going to go over to you. Many parents feel like they're expected to become policy experts overnight. When we talk about advocating for our children, a lot of times it's very daunting, because we feel like, oh, do we really understand the law? So what would you say to someone who's thinking, I just want to support my child, but I really don't know where to begin?
Yeah, so I think I might be a little biased here, but if you really want to support your child, I would say going to your local PFLAG chapter is a great place to start. I think there are parents there who are really going to understand how you feel or how you have felt. And I think that chapters focus on support. So even if you feel like you're not ready to jump fully into advocacy, having that local chapter is a great place to bring some of your questions, bring some anxieties, your hopes about supporting your child. That being said, if you want to get started with advocacy, and I hope that a lot of the people listening here do, we do have at PFLAG National numerous different resources to help you. You absolutely do not need to be a policy expert or really become a policy expert to just advocate for your child. One thing that we highlight a lot in our resources and in our trainings for parents that want to get involved with advocacy is, facts and figures are nice, but what really is impactful and what people, what elected officials really remember are stories. How did this policy at school affect me and affect my child is going to be a lot more impactful and a lot more powerful for someone to hear than the minutia of a policy. And are you actually enforcing this right? Because this part of this code says this and blah, blah, blah. Those are important debates to have. But as a parent, I don't think that you need to put that upon yourself to get a law degree and learn what all of these different policy positions mean. So I think just remembering that your own story has a lot of power and a lot of impact can kind of ease that. And we do have some great trainings on how to tell your story in the most impactful way and in a concise way. Because in a lot of these cases, when you're up talking to a school board, you might only have a couple of minutes to talk. So we have that as well. How do you condense your stories and experiences down to about 2 minutes is something that we teach people how to do. We do have a new campaign at PFLAG National that we launched this year called Fighting for Our Pride. I do encourage everyone to go check that out. It does have a lot of resources for how to get involved at all levels of government, but including the local school board level. It talks about, how do you kind of prepare yourself to go and talk to your school board? How do you balance, talking points versus your story, things of that nature that can really be helpful. And then 2 last things I'll say. One is that you can always reach out to the PFLAG National Advocacy Team. If you have questions, if you think, I'm not sure how to talk about this, we're always here to help, and we're happy to do so. And then I will also say, just remember, if you're concerned about talking to, especially, school board, a state legislative member or something like that, that these are very normal people. that you're going to be talking to. Dr. Rockwell is an extraordinary person and is really, really awesome. But most of these people that are getting elected to local and state office are nothing to be intimidated by. They are just normal people like you. They are there to listen to you and to hear your comments. So it's really important, I think, just to remember, that you're not talking to George Washington's ghost. You're talking to a real living, breathing person who has probably a lot of the same questions and concerns as you, and probably has something to learn from you. So just remember that. Go to our website, look at our resources, and I think you'll be well prepared to get involved.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that, it's really important also because it is intimidating and parents are often, worried about how do I tell that story? But storytelling is the most powerful thing. So Matthew, I'm going to go back to you because I know you've shared your story. I've been with you when you have shared your story in Tallahassee, and it's very powerful. But what would you say, because parents worry about saying the wrong thing or making a mistake. So if there's a parent here today that, really wants to step into that advocacy space, but they're carrying that fear of saying the wrong thing or making a mistake, what would you say to them?
I guess first, same to that hypothetical person. I'm certainly afraid as well. Um, you know, mm, I sorry, I think that, we can't really be afraid of making these mistakes. If you are afraid of them, I think it's actually probably a good thing because it's going to help you, avoid making them, to whatever extent it's preventable. So if you're going to Tallahassee, you're going to, look at these policies or proposed bills ahead of time and research them, or you're going to use your PFLAG resources to kind of learn, more about how you're going to be an advocate. But I guess beyond that, it's this beyond the usefulness of that fear. I think it's okay to be afraid, and it's okay to make mistakes. Um, you're just noting that our politicians aren't perfect people themselves, and we're certainly not perfect. So when we're going into these spaces and sharing our stories, what we're really doing is going in there to learn from each other. So as we're making mistakes, so long as we're willing and able to work through them and help each other learn from them, that's really what advocacy is about.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So I have a question that I'm going to ask each one of you. I want you to imagine that there is a parent watching today who, like we mentioned, might be scared, or maybe they're confused, or they're at the beginning of their journey. And if you can leave them with a message of hope and, y'all, we have time, so you can elaborate on that. But what is some message that you want folks to really walk away from hearing from this panel today? I'll start, Janie. I'll go back to you. What would you like to leave that message of hope for them?
Um, that folks want to do the right thing. I mean, you hear all of the great feedback on this call. There are so many great advocates and professionals out there who want to support you, but also within your school district, within your school, there are people there who want to support you. And so, really just look for the helpers, look for people within your school who want to support you and get guidance from them, ask questions, and speak up. You are definitely not alone. And I would argue that being here in Florida, we have been forged through the flames of Florida law. And so you have people here with knowledge and expertise on how to navigate these laws in a way that they are not having to navigate in other states. And so there are people who are really aware and educated and understanding on what to do when it comes to some of the most difficult questions that you might have. So never be afraid to speak up and advocate for your child. You should never have to compromise your child's privacy either. And so making sure that you're staying aware of other similar cases that don't that don't require outing a student or compromising their privacy, and keeping those in your back pocket, those similar cases in your back pocket as well. But just understanding that folks want to do the right thing for the most part, and that there are other people at your school who are going to be willing to help if you speak up.
I love that. Okay, Matt, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I guess I think that our hope should come from knowing that there are so many different ways for us to not just support our children, but also get involved and help create some of the changes that our kids and kids like ours deserve. So sometimes like when I'm feeling low in hope, that's the time to really just kind of lean into the work more because you kind of build that hope for yourself, and sometimes you can even be that hope for others.
Love it. Absolutely. Dr. Rockwell.
So, Martin Luther King Jr. once said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I do believe that that's true. And I think our path toward justice is kind of like climbing mountain switchbacks. And so right now it feels like we're moving backwards in a lot of ways. It's a really scary time, not just for LGBTQ students, but for our immigrant neighbors, for people with disabilities. It's a really scary time right now, but I do believe that things will first of all shift back in that forward direction and we'll start climbing again, but also that overall we've made progress. So when I look back to when I was in high school or middle school, like my kids are now, we didn't know the word transgender. We had never even heard of that. So, somebody can't openly be something that there's no word for. There were obviously transgender people and intersex people, but it was this big secret that nobody talked about. Even being bisexual, everyone would assume, oh, that doesn't exist. You're just gay and don't want to admit it, and so things have changed. When I go into a middle school or a high school and I see LGBTQ students openly being themselves and being accepted by their peers, that gives me hope because I can see that things have improved. And even though we've taken a step back from where we were 7 or 8 years ago, we're still much further along than we were 20 or 30 years ago. And I also believe that things are starting to shift and change. I look at some of our recent special elections where we've had pro-LGBTQ candidates win in districts that Trump won by sometimes as much as double digits, even in states like Florida. And so change is coming and the moral arc is bending toward justice, and we just have to keep fighting for what's right.
Yeah, I agree. I always say to my child, although things are difficult, you were born in the right time to be exactly who you are. So I think that it gives me hope as well to see and think back how things were for my older kids compared to my youngest now. Matthew, already to Matthew. Patrick.
We can go back to Matthew again too. But I mean, I do want to acknowledge and name that this is like a really tough and demoralizing time. I mean, even for me, just kind of like looking around the country and like looking at all these laws and talking to legislators about please, please, please don't pass this thing. It's very hard, and it gets very scary. And I do want to acknowledge how tough this time is. But for me personally, the thing that makes me hopeful and what I hope will bring hope to the people listening is that despite all of that, I see all of these people around the country not being kind of trapped by that fear and anxiety, and they go out and they fight and they get involved in advocacy, often for the first time. It's really awesome to see people kind of go out and often at great personal expense and inconvenience to go to their state capitals to go to their school board meetings, their county council meetings, and talk about this is wrong and this is what we should be doing instead. And I am here as like a parent of a trans kid, and this is what you need to do to make my kid's life better. I think the fact that people still have that courage and that fight is very uplifting personally to me, and makes this work worth doing. And I think what's especially heartening is that in a lot of the states where things are kind of the toughest in terms of the environment, like Florida, I see some of the best fight. I see, PFLAG chapters drive for like 6 or 7 hours to get up to Tallahassee and like talk to state legislators who, I mean, have not given them a ton of expectation that they will be listened to, but they do. They go up and they drive and they talk to these legislators. And at the end of the day, most, if not all, anti-LGBTQ plus bills for the last 3 years have been defeated. So that fight and that resolve to keep going actually works and does result in something. So I do hope that people will be kind of heartened by that example that, yes, this is scary. Yes, this is really tough, but people are still willing to go out there and still willing to fight, and are still finding that energy. So I hope that other people can too.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, we are pretty tough advocates here in Florida, and our state's so long that we do drive very far. So we get extra credit for that one. We have a couple questions in the Q&A, and if anybody has additional questions, we don't get time, we will still share additional resources after today's session. So I'm going to pose this to the whole panel, and whoever feels strongly about answering. The question is, we are a male same-sex married couple with a toddler. While we think our child is not LGBT, we are concerned about how our child might be treated in public school having two same-sex parents. How can we ensure that our child is treated respectfully? Also, for example, how do we deal with Mother's Day at school when our child does not have a mother, but two fathers instead? Any suggestions is highly appreciated.
So as a teacher, I can say that something like Mother's Day, there's lots of kids who don't have a mother. And so usually, if you have a teacher who's thinking about how to include all of their students, and you can talk to your child's teacher about this, you can create something for a mother or a grandmother or an aunt, any woman in your life who is important to you. And that's really important. We have students who've had a parent die. We have students who are being raised by aunts and uncles, grandparents, foster families, as well as students being raised with two male parents or two female parents. So, we need to recognize that and make sure that every child is always included. I will say that a lot of this comes down to where you live. I live in Gainesville, Florida. We are a very diverse and accepting community, and there isn't a lot of bullying of students who are LGBTQ or have LGBTQ families. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but that's not the culture here in this community. When I taught in Levy County, that definitely was the culture there. And if I was raising an LGBTQ child and lived in Levy County, I would probably be looking to move. Same thing with some of our other smaller counties. But I think that if you are living in a community that is relatively accepting, then, bullying is going to happen. Kids bully, but I don't think that it will be a specific targeting because of being in a gay household.
Yeah, I just want to add, my wife's a teacher, and these teachers, bless them, none of them are getting into the profession to make a ton of money or to have the heaps of respect that's going to be thrown upon them, right? They're all there because they care about the children, and none of them want to do anything that's going to hurt them. So yeah, I guess just really, I think you should be safe in assuming good intentions on their end. But I think one other thing that I would really consider doing is, don't wait for those Mother's Day or whatever holiday that you have on the calendar that you're worrying about. Get involved in your school beforehand. The schools are having a really hard time getting parents involved these days, so it's not really all that difficult to make yourself a bit of a superstar for the admins. If you're showing up on time, your kids fed and clothed properly, and you're showing up to all the different school events. Maybe throw a little rainbow wristband every once in a while, and just kind of be visible ahead of time, and you can kind of prep them for those interactions, like if you ever actually have to have them.
That's great advice. So we have time for one more question. And Janie, I think this one probably would be great for you to answer. So the question is, as a professor at a public university in Florida, can I ask college students the first day of class to write their name and pronouns on a name card and share with the class? I am a social work adjunct professor at FIU, and I have done this for many years, but now I'm unsure if I can do this.
Yeah, so that's a good question. As it pertains to soliciting pronouns for K through 12, which is what we focus on in Equality Florida Safe and Healthy Schools team, um, teachers, we know that teachers in Florida are not allowed to ask for another student's pronouns. And so the law pertaining to higher education, they're different. And so I don't want to exactly say if you would be allowed to do that in at a college level, because I'm not too sure. I don't want to land on one answer or another, but I know in K through 12, it would be no, even on a name card. So, but the best thing you can do for sure is verify with your school and with your supervisor and just make sure. But yeah, I definitely don't want to assume that just because something applies for K through 12, that it also applies for higher education, because that is not always the case. K through 12 is way more, some would say high stakes, and the laws are different. And a lot of these laws were written specifically for K through 12 students. And so I would lean towards you probably could continue to do that, but you never know. So I would say just make sure you check with your supervisor to be safe.
Thank you. Well, thank you to our incredible panelists for sharing your expertise and your hearts with us today. We have heard from education, advocacy, schools, and lived experience. And while, each perspective was different, I really think the one message that came through loud and clear is that you don't have to navigate this journey alone.